We are back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us on this wet and rainy Thursday. We are talking Black History Month with us. Dr. Adonijah Bakari is joining us from MTSU. He is an African Studies professor, associate professor there, and I do appreciate him joining us this morning. As we were going to the break, you know, we were talking about critical race theory, the teaching, the whole essence of Black History Month and the significance of it. As over the past decade or two, Professor, what have you seen changing in the way, Black history is perceived and what we talk about these days? What are your observations on that front? Has it changed? Is it the same issues?
Every year, there's a committee that pulls together the theme for Black History Month, and through the years, the themes, some of them have been more narrowly focused, and some of them have been broader. And I think in the past few years, the themes are becoming broader and more focused on not only the idea of history, but the idea of community. So this year's theme is African American health and wellness. And so when we think about that theme, we're thinking about not something necessarily that touches on just historical facts and figures, but something that's much broader that encompasses a community. So to answer your question, directly, I think the emphasis is still the same about information and dissemination of African American life and culture. But I think many of the themes are becoming broader to touch on things that affect us directly and indirectly.
The themes and what drives some of the changes for sure of late, getting into equality, racial equality, George Floyd, and so many other instances on that front. We see it across the country. We see some of these issues obviously surfacing here in the Nashville area. And I'm just wondering, when these things happen, and it brings up the conversation, and it can be emotional for a lot of people, and I just sit here watching it, covering the news, and wondering, when will people start really taking notice, and do you believe any substantive change will happen? Some of these horrible occurrences happen. It makes the news. We talk about it. I think George Floyd and some of these other cases have sustained, but then you wonder, time passes, and I sometimes wonder if anything really changes among general attitudes. What do you think?
I think that history is one of those things that is built layer by layer. And the occurrences in 2019 or 2020, 2021 with the Black Lives Matter movement and the different protests, I think really not only woke America up, but it woke the world up. Because when you look at what happened throughout the world, people began to look at their own societies and ask the question, are we really a society that promotes equality? Not only do we talk about it, but do we really promote it? Do we really champion that everybody has a fair shake? And I think those stepping stones are very important. As a historian, man, I would like to wake up and say, be able to write the book that equality has finally come to America. Social justice is the same for everybody. But that's not how history works. I mean, it never works that way. It's always gradual steps, 2 steps forward, one step back. So I don't think historians are expecting anything different. But I was happy to see that there was a push by just such a broad swath of society to come out to stand shoulder and shoulder with African American activists. I think that surprised people. I think people were kind of shocked that this wasn't just a Black issue. This was a American issue. This was a human issue that people felt very strongly about. So I think the real question and the bottom line is, what is our next step? Mm-hmm. That when we look at our history of our country, that people of color for over 150 years have been pushing for some basic rights. Somebody would say, well, Bakari, what are these rights? What do you want? That's always the question. And Black and brown people want the same thing that everybody wants. We want the opportunity to live unencumbered simply because of race. If you're gay or lesbian, people want the ability to live unencumbered because of their sexuality. We don't want to run from our sexuality or run from our race. We want it to be seen, but we don't want it to affect your quality of life. And I think one of the ways that the system is truly pushing to clamp back down on rights, it's almost like after the 1960s, there was a clamping down on the rights for Black and brown people. After the 2020-21 protests, there's been a clamping down, where we start to see that voting rights is becoming a question. Mm-hmm. And it's always covered in this gloss of, well, we want everybody to vote, but we just want the vote to be counted equally. Let's say, Nick, that there are 10,000 votes that, I'm from Chicago. Mm-hmm. And if you're from Chicago, everybody talks about, dead people voting in Chicago. And sure. I'm not talking about the presidential election. I'm talking about the mayor election, right? Mayor
Daley.
Dead people vote, with Daley, right. The machine, the Chicago machine pushed voting. But this idea that maybe a few people, dead people might have voted. But overall, we have one of the cleanest electoral processes in the world. I've traveled all around the world. And, this idea that we would begin to bring doubt about our electoral process, it scares me. I mean, it really does. Because the right to vote is so key to our democratic process. Now let's think about this. If we say that we have a democratic society and we have a society that's based on the Constitution, instead of making it harder for people to vote, we need to be making it easier for people to vote. We need to have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday voting. We need to allow people to get off from work and have a national voting day. You see this in some countries, that you don't have to worry about going to work. You're guaranteed to get out to vote. But, the slippery slope of losing the democracy comes when people begin to ban books. They begin to make it more difficult under the illusion that we're, making our voting process more secure. All of those things, we're seeing this erosion of our democratic processes. And some people would say, well, we've become too liberal a society. I guess that depends really on who you ask. But one thing about democracy is that, do we want a country where everybody thinks the same? And is that a democratic state? If everybody has to think the same, that sounds like some type of dictatorial country to me. You decide, somebody else is going to decide what color you wear. Somebody else is going to decide who you marry. Somebody else is going to decide, what color your hair is. That's not a democracy. So So I think we would do well to enjoy and celebrate our differences, whether that's racial differences, sexual differences, voting differences, political ideology differences. We should be celebrating those things, not trying to get rid of them.
Gotcha. Professor, we have to take another break. We've got 2 more segments to go. We'll take a break. Be back more with our conversation about Black History Month right after this. Stay with us.
This is a story.